A Russian fighter jet struck the propeller of an American drone today, forcing that unmanned aircraft to go down. That's according to U.S. Central Command. The State Department called the incident, which took place over international waters, quote, a brazen violation of international law. This happened amid an ongoing and unfolding debate in the Republican Party about whether or not the U.S. should continue to provide military aid to Ukraine against Russia. Going to get to that in a moment because it's a really important conflict. But first, it is worth remembering the history of Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S., the recent history at least. It's no secret Russian President Vladimir Putin has long desired full control over Ukraine. He said as much. He sees Ukraine as fundamentally and essentially a Russian property, part of the Russian nation. He has tried more than once to bring it back under his control. Back in 2015, after Ukrainian protests led to the resignation and then the flight to Russia of the country's Kremlin-backed leader, Putin kind of panicked, one might say, and sent his unmarked green men to outright annex Crimea. The illegal land grab did not go unpunished.
Today, the president froze American bank accounts and commerce with 11 top Russian officials, Crimean separatists, and Ukrainian sympathizers, including former President Yanukovych. If Russia moves into eastern Ukraine, the president approved tougher measures against Russia's arms industry and its oligarchs, Putin's inner circle.
A big headline from overseas today that the G8 is going back to the G7. The leaders of the group of leading industrialized nations, including the U.S., have voted to kick Russia out in response to what happened in Crimea.
There's some reporting that suggests that Putin was surprised by the blowback. But again, it led to a kind of standoff, as it were. And Putin was then in a politically weakened position. It was from that position, right, with a war raging in eastern Ukraine, co-optation of Crimea having happened, that Putin tries a different strategy. As Jim Rutenberg outlined in a fantastic piece in the New York Times last year, Russia's illegal, unprecedented scheme of interference in the 2016 U.S. presidential election was in no small part about Ukraine. Quote, Putin's American adventure might be best understood as advance payment for a geopolitical grail closer to home, a vassal Ukrainian state. As Rutenberg argues, the cloud of controversy surrounding 2016, what became known as Russiagate, sort of obscures the central role that Ukraine specifically played in Vladimir Putin's motivations for the whole thing. Now, it's a long, complicated story. It concerns characters you may not have thought much about in years. There's, of course, remember, Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort himself has lengthy ties to Kremlin-linked politicians in Ukraine. A guy who worked for Manafort named Konstantin Kilimnik, who is, according to U.S. intelligence, a Russian asset who fled Ukraine and is in Russia now. The sort of oversimplified version of the whole thing is that Kilimnik, the guy you saw there, the accused spy, pitched Manafort, and by extension the Trump campaign, an audacious land grab, quote, known loosely as the Mariupol Plan, after the strategically vital port city. It called for the creation of an autonomous republic in Ukraine's east, giving Putin effective control of the country's industrial heartland, where Kremlin-armed, funded, and directed separatists were waging a 2-year-old shadow war that had left nearly 10,000 dead. According to Rutenberg, Putin's entire scheme to sabotage Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016 to Trump's benefit was in large part in furtherance of that plan. It was to regain control of eastern Ukraine. But while Trump did work overtime to legitimize Putin's leadership, elevate him on the world stage, the specific Mariupol plan never came to fruition. The war in the Donbass raged on. And so a year after Trump left office, Putin threw out the subterfuge and the manipulation. He no longer had someone in the White House he thought he could control. And instead, he launched this disastrous war, this full-scale invasion. That brings us back to the current moment. Right now, the Republican Party is quite split on Ukraine. Most Republicans in Congress support military aid. But the MAGA wing of the party opposes sending any more money to Ukraine, including, of course, Donald Trump, who remains the de facto leader of both the MAGA faction and the Republican Party as a whole.
Do you want to cut off aid to Ukraine right now, Mr. President?
I want to make it so that Ukraine and Russia have to fight and fight for the last time. And we got to make peace. If we don't make peace, if we just keep sending everything, we're sending everything over. They got to fight for the last day, for the last 2 days. This thing has to stop, and it's got to stop now. And it's not going to stop if we continue to just load something up.
I mean, he sort of says everything and nothing in that one clip, but he opposes aid, I guess. I think it's fair to say that the base of the Republican Party is with Donald Trump. Polling supports that, and that puts other Republican candidates for president in a difficult position. So there's some like Nikki Haley and Mike Pence and Mike Pompeo who are sticking with the Republican Party foreign policy establishment in Congress, supporting further military aid to Ukraine. I think they're doing it because they believe in it. It probably isn't going to do them any favors in a Republican primary, which is likely why Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who also very much wants to be president, has been finding increasingly elaborate ways to dodge and weave whenever he's asked about Ukraine. Until now, that is. In response to a questionnaire from possibly the most vocal critic of aid to Ukraine in American media, Tucker Carlson, DeSantis firmly planted his flag on the side of Trump and Russia and against Ukraine. Quote, while the U.S. has many vital national interests, becoming further entangled in a territorial dispute between Ukraine and Russia is not one of them. Now, just to be absolutely clear, where I stand, writing off an imperialist war of aggression as a simple territorial dispute is gross and ridiculous. It also okay to raise questions about U.S. military aid. In fact, I think an open and clear debate on this question will be good for the country, in no small part, because I think DeSantis and Trump and the rest of them are dead wrong on this issue. And a sustained fight over this question is going to make that clear.